You got a really bad wife, didn't you? She's useless. She's nothing." I left work early and entered the house to hear my mother-in-law's voice coming from the living room. I couldn't help but gasp and listen in. "She's getting a big inheritance, so there's no need to be stingy with it. I do most of the housework. I even iron her shirts. But I do it so that I can spend her inheritance." She's apparently talking about me. My mother-in-law is talking about me. I was astonished by my mother-in-law's words. My mother-in-law is usually very kind and considerate. She even took the initiative in doing the housework. I had never heard her talk like this before. She called me a bad and useless daughter-in-law. Was my mother-in-law really like this? And by inheritance, does she mean the inheritance I received from my aunt? I quietly approached the living room with light footsteps so that she wouldn't notice. "If I didn't have the inheritance, I wouldn't have taken her as my daughter-in-law. She's a plain, uninteresting girl, the kind you can't boast about to your neighbors. But it's all about the money. I gotta be patient." Patient? Huh. My mother-in-law kept bad-mouthing me after that. I wondered who she was talking to. I gasped at the figure I saw when I quietly peeked inside. And then my mother-in-law grinned and put her hands together. "Actually, this is about her aunt who died and left her the inheritance." I almost screamed and quickly covered my mouth as my mother-in-law told the story. No way. No way. My name is Sally, a 28-year-old housewife. I met my husband David at a blind date that one of my co-workers invited me to, and we hit it off and started dating. My parents died in an accident when I was very young, and my aunt Nikki, my father's sister, took me in and raised me. My aunt was divorced when she was young, but she was a successful businesswoman. She raised me strictly, kindly, lovingly, and carefully. She also helped me to get through college. With my first salary as a working adult, I treated my aunt to dinner as a token of my gratitude. Then, my aunt was diagnosed with cancer. By the time we found out, it had already metastasized and there was nothing we could do. She was given a short life expectancy. My aunt must have somehow understood the situation. The company was left in the hands of someone she trusted, and no major problems occurred. The last year my aunt passed away. Many people attended the funeral, including my aunt's subordinates at her company and her legal advisor.
"Sally, are you all right? Get some rest."
"David, thank you." I was so exhausted and depressed after losing my only family member, but David supported me. David was my boyfriend at the time. He has supported me ever since. David is really kind. I want to live with him forever. After that, he proposed to me, and I decided to marry him. When I went to his house to greet his parents, my mother-in-law welcomed me warmly. "I would be very happy if you would come to be his bride," she said happily and hospitably. I had met my mother-in-law several times, and she had visited me at my house as well. But we had never talked about my family. So, I took this opportunity to tell her about my parents, that they have passed away. I also confided in her that my aunt who raised me also passed away last year. My mother-in-law did not give me a sour look, but rather embraced me with tears in her eyes and told me how hard it must have been for me. I was relieved to hear that my mother-in-law was so kind.
"So, I'd like to talk to you about something. My mother is divorced and has been living alone since I started working. But last month she fell and hurt her leg. I was worried when I thought she was getting to be too old. If it's okay with you, could my mom come live with us after we get married?"
I had a moment of hesitation at his proposal. I wanted to enjoy our newlywed life together, just the two of us. And I wondered if I would be able to handle living with my in-laws. "I'll take care of the housework. You can keep doing your job. Then, I can support both of you while you're working." I was grateful for the offer because I wanted to continue working. Besides, my mother-in-law is a very kind and gentle person. I was sure we would get along well. With that in mind, I agreed to move in with her. And so, the three of us began to live together. My husband and I are both busy with our jobs, but my mother-in-law takes care of the housework without a hint of disapproval. She does the cleaning and laundry during the day and cooks dinner for us, for which I am very grateful. We had been living like this for a while, but recently I began to feel that the house was too small for us. We began to talk about the possibility of moving to a bigger house in the future. However, every time we discussed the house, my husband and mother-in-law began to demand luxury.
We want a house with a lot of rooms for when you have children in the future. And the living room has to be spacious.
So, thinking about my mother's old age, I would prefer a house that's accessible for her, so she won't get hurt again. Then the house would have to be spacious as well. We also want a pantry, a kitchen counter, and so on.
My mother-in-law and husband were excited and made suggestions about the house. It's going to be more expensive than we thought. I have the inheritance from my aunt, so we'll be able to cover some of it, but... As I was pondering this, my mother-in-law sounded troubled.
There have been an increasing number of violent incidents lately, haven't there? I'm scared because I'm alone during the day. Isn't this area safe and secure?
My mother-in-law showed me a map of an upscale residential area. This looks like a difficult place to live in, isn't it? I tried to be modest in my opinion, but was rebuffed.
I'd feel sorry for your future children because they wouldn't be able to go out and play if they were born in an unsafe area. You have to work late some days, too, so I want a safe place. I am just thinking for your sake.
My husband agreed with her. My husband was sympathetic.
I want to protect my family. Let's move to a place where we can feel a little safer.
And so, halfway through the process, we were moving to purchase a very upscale home. Then one day, I was sick in the morning with a cold. Still, I had some work to do, so I went to work. But after lunch, my fever started to rise and I began to feel lightheaded, so I decided to leave work early. When I arrived home and opened the front door, I heard my mother-in-law's voice coming from the living room.
You got a really bad wife, didn't you? She's useless.
I couldn't believe my ears, so I sat in the doorway and listened with bated breath.
Well, she's getting a big inheritance, so there's no need to be stingy with the new house, is there? I do most of the housework anyway. I even iron her shirts. But I'm doing it so that I can spend that girl's inheritance.
That girl is apparently me. My mother-in-law is talking about me. However, I am astonished by my mother-in-law's words. My mother-in-law is usually very kind and considerate. She even took the initiative in doing the housework. I had never heard her talk like this before. She called me a useless wife. What kind of mother-in-law would do something like this? And by inheritance, does she mean that thing I inherited from my aunt? I quietly approached the living room, hiding my presence.
If I couldn't have the inheritance, I wouldn't have taken her in as my daughter-in-law. She's a plain, uninteresting girl that I wouldn't be proud to show off to the neighbors. But it's all for the money, so I have to put up with it.
Put up with it, huh? My mother-in-law kept bad-mouthing me after that. Who was she talking to? I quietly peeked inside and gasped at the person I saw. It was my husband, talking to my mother-in-law.
It's all right, Mom. Her aunt had a lot of money. I'll make her buy a house in an upscale neighborhood using her inheritance. Then after a while, we'll get rid of her."
My husband grinned. It seemed that he'd planned to seduce me and force me to give them my inheritance. I had no idea that even my husband was thinking such a terrible thing. My mother-in-law grinned and put her hands together.
Actually, this is about the aunt who left her the inheritance. Her name is Nikki, and she was actually a classmate of mine.
I almost let out a scream of surprise and quickly put my hands over my mouth. I was shocked because I had no idea that my mother-in-law and aunt had a connection. According to my mother-in-law, my aunt was a hard-working type, and my mother-in-law was the it girl in school.
But Nikki was the class president and always nagged me. She told me not to force people to clean or bully the underclassmen. She was so cocky, even though she was just a plain-looking student. I hated her. But I was popular, and I thought Nikki would spend the rest of her life in the shadows. And yet,
my mother-in-law bit her lip in frustration. She met my aunt at a class reunion 20 years ago, and she had gone from a simple, scruffy student to a company owner. She saw my aunt being praised by everyone around her, even though they were both divorcees. She was so frustrated and embarrassed to see how much difference there was between them. She had always been jealous of my aunt. It was then that my husband brought me to her. She thought my aunt and I looked somewhat alike, and our family names were the same. She thought it was impossible, so she asked her classmates and found out that I was her niece. However, my aunt had passed away before meeting my mother-in-law, so she planned to use my inheritance. Her injury was also a lie to make me feel sorry for her.
"I was glad you were aware of the inheritance. I never would have married Sally otherwise."
isn't that right? I went to your room once when you were living together. I secretly looked at Sally's bank documents. I saw that she had a huge amount of money saved up.
I was shocked to see the two of them laughing together, but gradually I grew angry. They were both after my inheritance. She had been so kind to me, let me marry David, and taken care of the housework, all for the purpose of using my inheritance. I can't forgive them. Watch me. I'm going to pay you back double. The next day I smiled and said to them, "I found the perfect place for you two. I have already made a down payment." When I told them this, both my mother-in-law and husband were overjoyed to find a house in a high-class residential area. On the day of the move, I had to go to work in the morning for a work-related reason, so I was out of the house from the morning. When I returned, I found all my belongings had been thrown into the garbage dump. When I entered the house, the keys to the new house, the expensive furniture, and my husband's and mother-in-law's belongings were gone. All I could see was the divorce papers on the floor, as if to say, "You are no longer needed." I called my husband. "What's this all about? What is this?"
"We have a new house, and you're no longer of any use to us."
My husband answered the phone and started laughing when he heard my voice. Then my mother-in-law starts talking.
I'm sorry, Sally. I always hated you because of your resemblance to Nikki. The house has already been sold, so if you don't want to get caught trespassing, get out of my house.
Oh no. I was shocked, and my mother-in-law hung up the phone, seemingly satisfied. Well then, I'd better get the hell out of here. I muttered to myself and turned off my phone. When I turned on my phone the next day, I was surprised to see a large number of incoming calls. When I answered it, it was my husband.
"Why aren't you at your parents' house?"
My husband spoke somewhat exasperatedly. "You guys told me you sold that house. Have you forgotten that already?"
"I was looking for you. What the hell? The new house?"
My husband was furious over the phone. Actually, the address of the new house was a house in an upscale neighborhood. But it was a run-down house in the shadow of the cheapest high-rise apartment building in the area. I could hear my mother-in-law shouting behind my husband. "Isn't this the perfect place for you guys?" I finally couldn't hold back my laughter. I had pretended to be shocked yesterday, but after hanging up the phone, I was laughing hysterically at how well it had gone. I had already moved into the luxury apartment I had originally set aside for myself.
What's so perfect about it? You're crazy. When I snooped through your bank statements, I saw that you had lost several $100,000. I thought you had spent it on a new house.
I heard my mother-in-law slip up. Unfortunately, the hundreds of thousands of dollars I lost was not to buy a house in an upscale neighborhood. It was used to buy a luxury condo for me to live in. In other words, I'm getting a little bit of a kick out of it. Oh, and by the way, I own the house, so the rent is paid by me, the owner. Well, that is, if David's salary can pay it. As I said this, my mother-in-law asked my husband what I meant. My husband is actually paid less than I am. Further investigation revealed that my mother-in-law's ex-husband, who had divorced her, was paying her a hefty amount of child support, and she and my husband were splurging the money. As expected, the child support stopped when he reached adulthood, but neither my mother-in-law nor my husband seemed to have gotten out of that habit, even after he entered the workforce. My husband had borrowed money before we got married. They seemed to be laughing high among their friends that he had caught a wife with a high income. I heard my mother-in-law yelling at my husband, but I asked her, "Can you speak for others too, mother-in-law? Your divorce was caused by your affair, wasn't it? I heard that you had run away with your lover after you got pregnant with David." When I told her this, my husband was absolutely mortified. My mother-in-law was making excuses in a loud voice, as if she was in a hurry. The two of them were on the phone saying, "Come over here right now and I'll beat you to a pulp." But when I told them that the divorce proceedings were already completed, they went even more crazy. The neighbors seemed to have called the police because of their bizarre state, and I thought I heard the siren of a police car. I could hear the two being taken away by the police over the phone. They were eventually released that day, but my ex-husband's income was not enough to pay the rent and debts, so they had to leave the house. My ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law are apparently living in a small, cheap apartment in an unsafe city. By the way, when I sold the shabby house, I sold it for a better price than I expected because it was going to be used as a parking lot. After that, my ex-husband, who did not know my current address, sent a letter to my company. The contents of the letter stated that since we were a married couple, I was obligated to hand over half of my property if we were to get a divorce. It also said that I was obligated to repay any debts owed to my husband. I wondered what this person was saying. Oh well, let's leave it to the lawyers. I decided to leave this matter to the lawyer who was the general counsel of my aunt's company. According to the lawyer who went to see them, my ex-mother-in-law turned pale as soon as she saw the lawyer. In fact, the lawyer was a former student who had been harassed by my ex-mother-in-law. He had been a good partner of my aunt as her legal advisor. My ex-mother-in-law didn't seem to know that much about him.
"If you keep hanging around Sally any longer, I'm going to crush you both to the ground."
The lawyer intimidated them in a low voice and laughed.
"The wife is not obligated to repay any debts incurred before the marriage. Furthermore, David is not entitled to her inheritance, since she inherited it before the marriage."
He told my ex-husband that. He also told my ex-mother-in-law.
"Nikki is a person who built up her assets through her own efforts, unlike you. You cheated on your husband, so don't think you're on the same level as her."
When he said this, my ex-mother-in-law just looked down with a blue face, unable to say anything back. After that, my husband got into debt again and went around trying to get money. But it seems that even his friends gave up on him. Finally, when he followed a colleague at work to borrow money, he was reported to the appropriate department. He was eventually forced to resign. He is now living with my ex-mother-in-law in a very poor state. They have been having fierce parent-child fights every day, and the police are often called by neighbors. But they have no choice but to live together because they don't have money. Even if they sold the things they had bought with their own money, their debts did not decrease. They couldn't give up on my inheritance and came to my office. Of course, they were taken away by the police. I was grateful that my lawyer then worked to get a restraining order against them. I became interested in making more money after selling the land, and I actively studied. Apparently, I had a good sense of what I was doing, so I got a license as a financial planner and learned about investments. Since I started my new job as a financial planner, I am enjoying my job, and I think I don't need to get married for a while.